If you are looking for some classical Greek epic poem, you are at the right video. Welcome. I am Daisy, your hostess. Glad you found me. And to you who have subscribed to my channel, welcome back, and thank you for being part of my community. Watch your step. Yep, watch your step as you board onto the Odysseus ship. Yeah, the water's a bit choppy. This literary time machine is about to take off. It was written around the year 725 BC, era before the birth of Jesus Christ. This is around the time where oratory history is finally making itself onto tablets and papyrus. Homer's Odyssey, set in the late Bronze Age, allows us to explore ancient Greece and its mindset. Okay, get ready because we're going to be introduced to the giants. Did they exist? According to Homer, they did. And here's a quote from a Greek historian named Solinus from 200 AD. Quote, "Before there were any humans on Pellene, the story goes that a battle was fought between the gods and the giants. Traces of the giants' demise continue to be seen to this day. Whenever torrents swell with rain and excessive water breaks their banks and floods the fields, they say that even now in gullies and ravines the people discover bones of immeasurable enormity, like men's carcasses, but far bigger." End quote. Now, keep in mind that the Mycenaean civilization, which lasted from 1600 to 1100 BC, was the Middle Hellenic phase of civilization in Greece, which derived its name from the city of Mycenae in northeastern Peloponnese. The two cities, Mycenae and Tiryns, are now the most precious remnants of the Greece's transition from Neolithic to Bronze Age, before it plunges into the Greek Dark Ages in the first millennium BC. And to me, the burning of the Great Library of Alexandria and ancient texts is what the plunge into the Dark Age was about. Was it an accident, or were they trying to obfuscate history? Now, were the giants real? Would the Bible and the Torah lie? These also are ancient texts written in 450 to 165 BC, before the birth of Christ. Like in Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 through 4, some biblical scholars say that the Nephilims mentioned in that book are being referred to as the giants. In the second book of Samuel, chapter 21, verse 18, they mentioned someone being a descendant of the giants. The word giant is actually used in there, as well as in the book of Numbers, chapter 13, verse 32 through 33, where it says, "We even saw giants. These were the Anakites. We felt like grasshoppers before them." So join me for book 9, titled New Coast and Poseidon's Son. Before we set off onto these new coast, King Alkinos is asking Odysseus what's his name and where he comes from. Odysseus honors the king by answering him and tells him of how he came about being stranded on his coastline. He talked about Calypso, which we met her in book 5, titled Sweet Nymph and Open Sea. Clearly, if we see past the myth, she must have been deep into the knowledge of herbs, because she was able to keep Odysseus under her spell for 7 years. Then he was a bit kind by calling Circe an enchantress. Her drugs were even more powerful. She could turn men into pigs. And when she wasn't doing that, she had that good stuff that Calypso was using to help forget the troubles, even your dreams and aspirations. By the grace of the gods, he was able to get out of that situation and took his vessel on the high seas again and ended up with the Cicones because they were allies of the Trojans, and he sacked that city and enslaved the women. And as I mentioned to you in one of the first videos, probably the first video, slavery was a thing. Remember, this is the late Bronze Age and also the classical Greek. And it was a common thing. Slavery was a common thing back then. So back to this storyline here. He then takes his vessel to the Cicones because they were allies of the Trojans. So they had just finished with the Trojan situation, and now they went over there to the Cicones to sack their city and enslave their women. And after that adventure, they headed back onto the high seas, where he landed on the coastline of the Lotus Eaters. Now, I found this my favorite and interesting part of this voyage. So he meets these Lotus Eaters, and Odysseus said these people were friendly, and all they wanted to do was make you eat the lotus flower, and they wanted to just eat the lotus flower because that's what they lived on. And the thing is, it didn't take him long to figure out that if you ate it, you never cared to return. You just wanted to stay in that place forever, browsing on that native bloom, forgetful of just everything. You just didn't want to go back to wherever you thought you came from. And by the way, I have added links to some of the sources that I've used in the research of my prelude here. So feel free to check them out. They're in the description of this video, and look at them at your leisure. According to Healthline.com, consuming blue lotus flower may make you feel high and result in a gentle euphoria. Some people have drawn comparisons to the high that people experience after consuming cannabis. The blue lotus flower, as they continue to say, is a water lily that predominantly grows in Egypt and certain parts of Asia. It holds cultural importance, and images of the flower have been found on ancient papyri and on the walls of tombs, and I'm sure you have seen that. Historians believe it was once used in Egypt as a traditional medicine to treat an array of conditions and disorders like anxiety and insomnia. It's known as an entheogenic drug, which is a mind-altering substance believed to alter one's consciousness in a spiritual or religious manner. Understand, though, that currently the blue lotus flower isn't approved for human consumption in the United States. However, it's not a controlled substance and is legally allowed to be cultivated, sold, and purchased, except in the state of Louisiana, where it is illegal. All right. So let's go back. I see Odysseus is waving at us. Well, he was not having any part of it and rushed everyone back on the ship, and perhaps the lotus flower would not have been as bad as seeing a giant eat your crew right in front of your very eyes. Imagine hearing the bones crunching and gushing of all the liquids. Well, he lost a few before he came up with a plan. That's what happened when he ended up over there with the Cyclops. This particular Cyclops came from the union of Poseidon and Theusa. Now, it could be said that in this particular case, Odysseus went looking for trouble, because what could be more sweeter than a shepherd tending his flock? And how would you feel if you came home and found someone inside eating your cheese? Now, I found it sweet and sad as we got an intimate peek of the feelings of Polyphemus the Cyclops, and the feelings that he had towards his father, Poseidon. I mean, this one-eyed giant looked nothing like his father, and it seemed that there was some contention between father and son by what Polyphemus told Odysseus. And he said, "Oh, you come from the other end of nowhere telling me, mind the gods? We Cyclops care not a whistle for your thundering Zeus or all the gods in bliss." Yet, I thought it was so sweet because, a father's love cannot be questioned. After Odysseus blinded the giant, I know that he was trying to escape, but again, I tell you, this giant was minding his own business. The Cyclops, Polyphemus, beckons his father in a moment of despair and just shouts out and wishes to be avenged. Poseidon hears this, I guess, from the depths of the ocean, and attempts to make Odysseus' journey home much harder than it actually seems to be. Even though Zeus already put in order that Odysseus was going to return home. But you know what? In the world of the gods, everything's fair. And putting in a little bit of challenge on his journey back, I don't think that kind of was against the whole plan that he wasn't going to make it home. It just didn't say how he was going to make it home, but he was going to make it home. I think, right? Anyway, grab the life jacket. I think we're going to need it. Book 9, New Coasts and Poseidon's Son. Now this was the reply Odysseus made. Alcinous, king in admiration of men, how beautiful this is to hear a minstrel gifted as yours. A god he might be singing. There is no boom in life more sweet, I say, than when a summer joy holds all the realm, and backwinter sits listening to a harper in a great hall, by rows of tables heaped with bread and roast meat, while a steward goes to dip up wine and bring your cups again. Here is the flower of life, it seems to me. But now you wish to know my cause for sorrow, and thereby give me cause for more. What shall I say first? What shall I keep until the end? The gods have tried me in 1,000 ways, but first my name. Let that be known to you, and I pull away from pitiless death. Friendship will bind us, though my land lies far. I am Laertes' son, Odysseus. Men hold me formidable for guile in peace and war. This fame has gone abroad to the sky's rim. My home is on the peak sea mark of Ithaca, under Mount Neon's wind-blown rove of leaves, in sight of other islands, Dulichion, Sami, Woodus, and Kinthos, Ithaca being most lofty in that coastal sea, and northwest, while the rest lie east and south. A rocky isle, but good for a boy's training. I shall not see on earth a place more dear, though I have been detained long by Calypso, loveliest among goddesses, who held me in her smooth caves to be her heart's delight, as Circe of Aea, the Enchantress, desired me, and detained me in her hall. But in my heart I never gave consent. Where shall a man find sweetness to surpass his own home and his parents? In far lands he shall not, though he find a house of gold. What of my sailing, then, from Troy? What of those years of rough adventure, weathered under Zeus? The wind that carried west from Ilion brought me to Ismaros on the far shore, a strong point on the coast of Cacones. I stormed that place and killed the men who fought. Plunder we took, and we enslaved the women to make division, equal shares to all. But on the spot I told them, back and quickly out to the sea again. My men were mutinous, fools on stores of wine. Sheep after sheep they butchered by the surf, and shambling cattle feasting, while fugitives went inland, running to call to arms the main forces of Cacones. This was an army trained to fight on horseback or where the ground required on foot. They came with dawn over that terrain like the leaves and blades of spring. So doom appeared to us, dark word of Zeus for us, our evil days. My men stood up and made a fight of it, backed on the ships, with lances kept in play, from bright morning through the blaze of noon, holding our beach, although so far outnumbered. But when the sun passed toward unyoking time, then the Achaeans, one by one, gave way. 6 benches were left empty in every ship that evening when we pulled away from death. And this new grief we bore with us to sea. Our precious lives we had, but not our friends. No ship made sail next day until some shipmate had raised a cry 3 times for each poor ghost unfleshed by the Cacones on that field. Now Zeus, the lord of cloud, roused in the north a storm against the ships, and driving veils of squall moved down like night on the land and sea. The bows went plunging at the gusts, sails cracked and lashed out strips in the big wind. We saw death in that fury, dropped the yards, unshipped the oars, and pulled for the nearest lee. Then 2 long days and nights we lay ashore, worn out and sick at heart, tasting our grief. Until a 3rd dawn came with ringlets shining. Then we put up our mast, hauled sail, and rested, letting the steersman and the breeze take over. I might have made it safely home that time, but as I came around Malea, the current took me out to sea, and from the north a fresh gale drove me on, past Cythera. 9 days I drifted on the teeming sea before dangerous high winds. Upon the 10th we came to the coastline of the lotus eaters, who live upon that flower. We landed there to take on water. All ships' companies mustered alongside for the midday meal. Then I sent out 2 picked men and a runner to learn what race of men that land sustained. They fell in soon enough with lotus eaters, who showed no will to do us harm, only offering the sweet lotus to our friends. But those who ate this honeyed plant, the lotus, never cared to report, nor to return. They longed to stay forever, browsing on the native bloom, forgetful of their homeland. I drove them all 3 whaling to the ships, tied them down under their rowing benches, and called the rest. All hands aboard, come, clear the beach, and no one taste the lotus, or you lose your hope of home. Filing in to their places by the rowlocks, my oarsmen dipped their long oars in the surf, and we moved out again on our seafaring. In the next land we found were Cyclops, giants, louts, without a law to bless them. In ignorance leaving the fruitage of the earth in mystery to the immortal gods. They neither plow nor sow by hand, nor till the ground, though grain, wild wheat, and barley grows unattended, and wine grapes in clusters ripen in heaven's rain. Cyclops have no muster and no meeting, no consultation or old tribal ways, but each one dwells in his own mountain cave, dealing out rough justice to wife and child, indifferent to what the others do. Well, then, across the wide bay from the mainland there lies a desert island, not far out, but still not close in shore. Wild goats in hundreds breed there, and no human being comes upon the isle to startle them, no hunter of all who ever tracked with hounds through forests or had rough going over mountain trails. The isle, unplanted and untilled, a wilderness pasture goats alone. And this is why good ships like ours with cheek paint at the bows are far beyond the Cyclops. No shipwright toils among them, shaping and building up symmetrical trimholes to cross the sea and visit all the seaboard towns, as men do who come and go in commerce over water. This isle, seagoing folk would have annexed it and built their homestead on it. All good land, fertile for every crop and season. Lush, well-watered meads along the shore, vines in profusion, prairie clear for the plow, where grain would grow, chin-high by harvest time, and rich subsoil. The island cove is landlocked, so you need no hawsers out astern, bowstones, or mooring. Run in and ride there till the day your cruise shaft to be under sail, and a fair wind blows. You'll find good water flowing from a cavern through dusky poplars in the upper bay. Here we made harbor. Some god guided us that night, for we could barely see our bows in the dense fog around us, and no moonlight filtered through the overcast. No lookout. Nobody saw the island dead ahead, nor even the great landward rolling below. That took us in. We found ourselves in shallows, keels grazing shore, so furled our sails and disembarked where the low ripples broke. There on the beach we lay, and slept till morning. When dawn spread out her fingertips of rose, we turned out marveling to toward the isle, while Zeus' shy nymph daughters flushed wild goats down from the heights, a breakfast for my men. We ran to fetch our hunting bows and long-shanked lances from the ships, and in 3 companies we took our shots. Heaven gave us game aplenty. For every one of 12 ships in my squadron, 9 goats fell to be shared. My lot was 10. So there all day, until the sun went down, we made our feast on meat galore and wine from the ship, for our supply held out. So many jars were filled at Ismaros, from stores of the Cicones that we plundered. We gazed, too, at Cyclops' land so near. We saw their smoke, heard the bleating from their flocks. But after sundown, in the gathering dusk, we slept again above the wash of ripples. When the young dawn with fingertips of rose came in the east, I called my men together and made a speech to them. Old shipmates, friends, the rest of you stand by. I'll make the crossing in my own ship. with my own company and find out what the mainland natives are, for they may be wild savages and lawless, or hospitable and God-fearing men. At this I went aboard and gave the word to cast off by the stern. My oarsmen followed, filing in to their benches by the rowlocks, and all in line dipped oars in the grey sea. As we rowed on, and nearer to the mainland, at one end of the bay, we saw a cavern yawning above the water, screened with laurel, and many rams and goats about the place inside a sheepfold, made from slabs of stone earth fast between tall trunks of pine and rugged towering oak trees. A prodigious man slept in this cave alone, and took his flocks to graze afield, remote from all companions. Knowing not but savage ways, a brute so huge, he seemed no man at all of those who eat good wheaten bread, but he seemed rather a shaggy mountain reared in solitude. We beached there, and I told the crew to stand by and keep watch over the ship. As for myself, I took my 12 best fighters and went ahead. I had a goatskin full of that sweet liquor that Aeonthe's son Maron had given me. He kept Apollo's holy grove at Ismaros. For kindness we showed him there, and showed his wife and child. He gave me 7 shining golden talons, perfectly formed, a solid silver wine bowl, and then this liquor, 12 two-handled jars of brandy, pure and fiery. Not a slave in Maron's household knew this drink. Only he, his wife, and the storeroom mistress knew, and they would put 1 cupful, ruby-colored, honey-smooth, and 20 more of water, but still the sweet scent hovered like a fume over the wine bowl. No man turned away when cups of this came around. A wineskin full I brought along, and victuals in a bag, for in my bones I knew some towering brute would be upon us soon, all outward power, a wild man, ignorant of civility. We climbed then briskly to the cave, but Cyclops had gone afield to pasture his fat sheep, so we looked around at everything inside. A drying rack that sagged with cheeses, pens crowded with lambs and kids, each in its class, firstlings apart from the middlings, and the dewdrops or newborn lambkins penned apart from both, and vessels full of whey were brimming there, bowls of earthenware and pails for milking. My men came pressing round me, pleading, why not take the cheeses? Get them stowed, come back, throw open all the pens, and make a run for it. We'll drive the kids and lambs aboard. We say put out again on good salt water. Ah, how sound that was! Yet I refused. I wished to see the caveman, what he had to offer. No pretty sight, it turned out, for my friends. We lit a fire, burnt an offering, and took some cheese to eat, then sat in silence around the embers waiting. When he came, he had a load of dry boughs on his shoulder to stoke his fire at supper time. He dumped it with a great crash into that hollow cave, and we all scattered fast to the far wall. Then over the broad cavern floor he ushered the ewes he meant to milk. He left his rams and he-goats in the yard outside and swung high overhead a slab of solid rock to close the cave. 24 four-wheeled wagons with heaving wagon teams could not have stirred that tonnage of that rock from where he wedged it over the doorsill. Next he took his seat and milked his bleating ewes. A practiced job he made of it, giving each ewe her suckling, thickened his milk, then into curds and whey, sieved out the curds to drip in withy baskets, and poured the whey to stand in bowls cooling until he drank it for his supper. When all these chores were done, he poked the fire, heaping on brushwood. In the glare he saw us. "Strangers," he said, "who are you, and where from? What brings you here by seaways? A fair traffic? Or are you wandering rogues who cast your lives like dice and ravage other folk by sea?" We felt a pressure on our hearts, in dread of that deep rumble and that mighty man. But all the same, I spoke up in reply. "We are from Troy, Achaeans, blown off course by shifting gales on the great South Sea, homeward bound, but taking routes and ways uncommon, so the will of Zeus would have it. We served under Agamemnon, son of Atreus. The whole world knows what city he laid waste, what armies he destroyed. It is our luck to come here. Here we stand, beholden for your help, or any gifts you give. a custom is to honor strangers. We would entreat you, great sir, have a care for the gods' courtesy. Zeus will avenge the unoffending guest. He answered this from his brute chest, unmoved. You are a ninny, or else you come from the other end of nowhere, telling me, mind the gods? We Cyclops care not a whistle for your thundering Zeus, or all the gods in bliss. We have more force by far. I would not let you go for fear of Zeus, you or your friends, unless I had a whim to. Tell me, where was it now you left your ship, around the point or down the shore? I wonder. He thought he'd found out, but I saw through this, and answered with a ready lie. My ship? Poseidon, Lord, who sets the earth a-tremble, broke it up on the rocks at your land's end. A wind from seaward served him, drove us there. We are survivors, these good men and I. Neither reply nor pity came from him, but in one stride he clutched at my companions and caught two in his hands, like squirming puppies to beat their brains out, spattering the floor. Then he dismembered them and made his meal, gaping and crunching like a mountain lion everything, innards, flesh, and marrow bones. We cried aloud, lifting our hands to Zeus, powerless, looking on at this appalled. But Cyclops went on filling up his belly with man-flesh and great gulps of whey, then lay down like a mast among his sheep. My heart beat high now at the chance of action, and drawing the sharp sword from my hip, I went along his flank to stab him where the midriff holds the liver. I had touched the spot when sudden fear stayed me. If I killed him, we'd perish there as well, for we could never move his ponderous doorway slab aside. So we were left to groan and wait for morning. When the young dawn with fingertips of rose lit up the world, the Cyclops built a fire and milked his handsome ewes, all in due order, putting the sucklings to the mothers. Then, his chores being all dispatched, he caught another brace of men to make his breakfast, and whisked away his great door slab to let his sheep go through. But he, behind, reset the stone as one would cap a quiver. And there was a din of whistling as the Cyclops rounded his flock to higher ground. Then stillness. And now I pondered how to hurt him worse, if but Athena granted what I prayed for. Here are the means I thought would serve my turn. A club or staff lay there along the fold, an olive tree felled green and left to season for Cyclops' hand. And it was like a mast, a lugger of 20 oars, broad in the beam. A deep sea-going craft might carry. So long, so big around, it seemed. Now I chopped out a 6-foot section of this pole and set it down before my men, who scraped it. And when they had it smooth, I hewed again to make a stake with pointed end. I held this in the fire's heart and turned it, toughening it, then hid it well back in the cavern under one of the dung piles in profusion there. Now came the time to toss for it. Who ventured along with me? Whose hand could bear to thrust and grind that spike in Cyclops' eye when mild sleep had mastered him? As luck would have it, the men I would have chosen won the toss. 4 strong men, and I made it 5 as captain. At evening came the shepherd with his flock, his woolly flock, the ram as well, this time entered the cave. By some sheep-herding whim, or a god's bidding, none were left outside. He hefted his great boulder into place and sat him down to milk his bleeding ewes in proper order, put the lambs to suck, and swiftly ran through all his evening chores. Then he caught 2 more men and feasted on them. My moment was at hand, and I went forward holding an ivy bowl of my dark drink, looking up, saying, Cyclops, try some wine. Here's liquor to wash down your scraps of men. Taste it, and see the kind of drink we carried under our planks. I meant it for an offering if you would help us home, but you are mad, unbearable, a bloody monster. After this, will any other traveler come to see you? He seized and drained the bowl, and it went down so fiery and smooth he called for more. Give me another, thank you kindly. Tell me, how are you called? I'll make a gift will please you. Even Cyclops know the wine grapes grow out of grassland and loam in heaven's rain, but here's a bit of nectar and ambrosia. 3 bowls I brought him, and he poured them down. I saw the fuddle and flush come over him. Then I sang out in cordial tones, Cyclops, you ask my honorable name? Remember the gift you promised me, and I shall tell you. My name is Nobody. Mother, father, and friends, everyone calls me Nobody. And he said, Nobody's my meat then. After I eat his friends, others come first. There's a noble gift now. Even as he spoke, he reeled and tumbled backward, his great head lolling to one side, and sleep took him like any creature. Drunk, hiccuping, he dribbled streams of liquor on bits of men. Now, by the gods, I drove my handspike deep in the embers, charring it again, and cheered my men along with battle talk to keep their courage up. No quitting now. The pike of olive, green though it had been, reddened and glowed as if about to catch. I drew it from the coals, and my 4 fellows gave me a hand. Lugging it near the Cyclops as more than natural force nerved them. Straight forward they sprinted, lifted it, and rammed it deep in his crater eye. And I leaned on it, turning it as a shipwright turns a drill in planking, having men below to swing the 2-handled strap that spins it in the groove. So with our brand we bored that gray eye socket while blood ran out around the red-hot bar. Eyelid and lash were seared. The pierced ball hissed broiling, and the roots popped. In a smithy one sees a white-hot axe head or an adze plunged and wrung in cold tub, screeching steam, the way they make soft iron blade and hard, just so that the eyeball hissed around that spike. The Cyclops bellowed, and the rock roared around him, and we fell back in fear. Clawing his face, he tugged the bloody spike out of his eye, threw it away, and his wild hands went groping. Then he set up a howl for Cyclops who lived in caves on windy peaks nearby. Some heard him, and they came by divers ways to clump around outside and call. What ails you, Polyphenes? Why do you cry so sore in the starry night? You will not let us sleep. Sure no man's driving off your flock. No man has tricked you, ruined you? Out of the cave, the mammoth Polyphenes roared in answer. Nobody's tricked me. Nobody's ruined me. To this rough shout they made a sage reply. Ah well, if nobody's played you foul there in your lonely bed, we are no use in pain given by great Zeus. Let it be your father, Poseidon Lord, to whom you pray. So saying, they trailed away, and I was filled with laughter to see how like a charm the name deceived them. Now Cyclops, wheezing as the pain came on him, fumbled to wrench away the great doorstone and squatted in the breach with arms thrown wide for any silly beast or man who bolted, hoping somehow I might be such a fool. But I kept thinking how to win the game. Death sat there, huge. How could we slip away? I drew on all my wits and ran through tactics, reasoning as a man will for dear life, until a trick came, and it pleased me well. The Cyclops rams were handsome, fat, with heavy fleeces, a dark violet. 3 abreast, I tied them silently together, twining cords of willow from the ogre's bed. Then slung a man under each middle one to ride there safely, shielded left and right. So 3 sheep could convey each man. I took the woolliest ram, the choicest of the flock, and hung myself under his kinky belly, pulled up tight, with fingers twisted deep in sheepskin ringlets for an iron grip. So, breathing hard, we waited until morning. When dawn spread out her fingertips of rose, the rams began to stir, moving for pasture, and peals of bleating echoed round the pens where dams with udders full called for a milking. Blinded and sick with pain from his head wound, the master stroked each ram, then let it pass. But my men riding on the pectoral fleece, the giant's blind hands blundering never found. Last of them all my ram, the leader, came weighted by wool and me with my meditations. The Cyclops patted him, and then he said, Sweet cousin Ram, why lag behind the rest in the night cave? You never linger so, but graze before them all and go far to crop sweet grass and take your stately way leading along the streams until at evening you run to be the first one in the fold. Why now so far behind? Can you be grieving over your master's eye? That carrion rouge and his accursed companions burnt it out when he had conquered all my wits with wine. Nobody will not get out alive, I swear. Oh, had you brain and voice to tell where he may be now, dodging all my fury? Bashed by his hand and bashed on this rock while his brains would strew the floor, and I should have rest from the outrage nobody worked upon me. He sent us into the open then. Close by, I dropped and rolled clear of the ram's belly, going this way and that to untie the men. With many glances back, we rounded up his fat, stiff-legged sheep to take aboard, and drove them down to where the good ship lay. We saw, as we came near, our fellow faces shining. Then we saw them turn to grief, tallying those who had not fled from death. I hushed them, jerking head and eyebrows up, and in a low voice told them, "Load this herd, move fast, and put the ship's head toward the breakers." They all pitched in at loading, then embarked and stuck their oars into the sea. Far out, as far offshore as shouted words would carry, I sent a few back to the adversary. "O Cyclops, would you feast on my companions? Puny am I in a caveman's hands. How do you like the beating that we gave you, you damned cannibal? Eater of guests under your roof, Zeus and the gods have paid you." The blind thing in his doubled fury broke a hilltop in his hands and heaved it after us. Ahead of our black prow it struck and sank whelmed in a spuming geyser, a giant wave that washed the ship's stern foremost back to shore. I got the longest boat hook out and stood fending us off, with furious nods to all to put their backs into a racing stroke. "Row, row, or perish!" So the long oars bent kicking the foam stemward, making head until we drew away, and twice as far. Now when I cupped my hands I heard the crew in low voices protesting. "God's sake, Captain, why bait the beast again? Let him alone." That tidal wave he made on the first throw all but beached us, all but stove us in. Give him our bearing with your trumpeting. He'll get the range and lob a boulder. He'll smash our timbers and our heads together. I would not heed them in my glorying spirit, but let my anger flare and yelled, "Cyclops, if ever mortal man inquire how you were put to shame and blinded, tell him Odysseus, raider of cities, took your eye, Laertes' son, whose home's on Ithaca." At this he gave a mighty sob and rumbled. "Now comes the weird upon me spoken of old. A wizard, grand and wondrous, lived here, Telemus, a son of Eurymos. Great length of days he had in wizardry among the Cyclops, and these things he foretold for time to come. My great eye lost, and at Odysseus' hands. Always I had in mind some giant, armed in giant force, would come against me here. But this, you, small, pitiful, and twiggy, you put me down with wine, you blinded me. Come back, Odysseus, and I'll treat you well, praying the god of earthquake to befriend you. His son I am, for he by his avowal fathered me, and, if he will, he may heal me of this black wound, he and no other of all the happy gods or mortal men." A few words I shouted in reply to him. "If I could take your life, I would, and take your time away, and hurl you down to hell. The god of earthquake could not heal you there." At this he stretched his hands out in his darkness towards the sky of stars, and prayed Poseidon. "O hear me, Lord, blue girdler of the islands, if I am thine indeed, and thou art Father. Grant that Odysseus, raider of cities, never see his home. Laertes' son, I mean, who kept his hall on Ithaca. Should destiny intend that he shall see his roof again among his family in his fatherland, far be that day, and dark the years between. Let him lose all companions and return under strange sail to bitter days at home. In these words he prayed, and the god heard him. Now he laid hands upon a bigger stone and wheeled around Titanic for the cast to let it fly in the black prow vessel's track. But it fell short, just aft its steering oar, and whelming seas rose giant above the stone to bear us onward toward the island. There, as we ran in, we saw the squadron waiting, the trim ships drawn up side by side, and all troubled friends who waited, looking seaward. We beached her, grinding keel in the soft sand, and waded in, ourselves, on the sandy beach. Then we unloaded all the Cyclops' flock to make division, share and share alike. Only my fighters voted that my ram, the prize of all, should go to me. I slew him by the seaside and burnt his long thigh bones to Zeus beyond the storm cloud, Cronos' son, who rules the world. But Zeus disdained my offering. Destruction for my ships he had in store, on death for those who sail them, my companions. Now all day long until the sun went down, we made our feast on mutton and sweet wine, till after sunset in the gathering dark we went to sleep above the wash of ripples. When the young dawn with fingertips of rose touched the world, I roused the men, gave orders to man the ships, cast off the mooring lines, and filling it to sit beside the rowlocks, oarsmen in line dipped oars in the gray sea. So we moved out, sat in the vast offing, having our precious lives, but not our friends. End of Book 9.